Welcome, everyone. This is Versus on a Monday on Film Thread. Today on the show, it's going to be a very interesting group today. We have a group of YouTubers who are Christians who will be talking to us about Immaculate and the first Omen and religious horror in general, and maybe a little NUNSPLOITATION. Thank you for joining me today. I always like to have an interesting group of people to talk about different topics. And this is one with the success of Sydney Sweeney's Immaculate and now the first Omen in theaters. I think it's time we talk about this. Religious horror. Why is it so popular? Why do these movies keep getting made and actually do very well? Let's discuss it. Let's talk about it on this episode of Versus. Yeah, get your questions ready. Let's go. Come on. Hey everyone, how's it going today? Let's introduce who's here. We actually do have other people joining late. Some people have to leave a little early today. So it's going to be a group that'll be tag teaming in, not unlike a wrestling match. Does that make sense, Alan?
Yes. This story is about to start.
All right. So let's get into it. First up is introduce yourself and tell us about your faith.
Alan Ing, Jesus is the rock, and he rolls my blues away. Bop shoo bop, bop shoo bop.
Hi, I'm Aaron Sparrow. I am here representing Thinking Critical on YouTube, and I'm really excited to talk about this. I think that there's a lot of really interesting things, when you get into like Christian theology and the way that it's portrayed in movies. So looking forward to the discussion.
Hello, I'm the Reina Creole, and the Lord hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but of love, of power, and of a sound mind. And that's exactly what I keep in mind when I watch religious horror movies. So let's get started.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? My name is Max, or otherwise MVP for my initials. My full name, which is Maxfield Von Priestley. I actually studied ministry in college. It was my minor, and I carried my faith throughout my entire time in the Marine Corps, and it has been my rock, my foundation. My Savior, Christ, and his kingdom is everything I try and aspire to be. And when watching these horror films, it's always something that you wonder, what is Hollywood trying to do with the Christian faith? What are they trying to say here? So hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that tonight. Looking forward to it.
What's happening, guys? Dante from Verbal Riot. I was Gnostic, then Christian, then Gnostic again. So that's a little bit of my background, and I can't wait to talk about this actually, because it's not often we get to talk about religion and movies in the same video. So let's do it.
All right. Thank you for your intros. We do have other people that'll be joining us. Danica XIX, aka Comic Book Girl 19, among others, will be joining later. He's having, I think it's all eclipse related, folks. I think all of this is eclipse related. Weird things have been happening all day for me. So I don't know about you guys.
We should also mention that three of us will be in Sin City tomorrow. And for all the pagan Film Thread watchers out there, we have a meetup in Vegas tomorrow.
I'd say that's a lot of our viewers, honestly. But yeah, we will be in Sin City in Vegas tomorrow for the Film Threat meetup at 7 p.m. Tuesday, April 9th at the Millennium Fandom Bar. The RSVP link will be in the description. And so we hope to see you there, because I got all sorts of free stuff to give away. And before we get started, I want to thank our new members today who joined: Vic Whiplash, Jimmy Francis, and Fletcher Williams. I Suck at Games channel. Thank you to all of you for your support of Film Threat and our new show Versus. Let's get into it. I want to get everyone here has seen the first Omen. And just to be clear, it's kind of confusing because I was talking to a friend we were talking about it after the movie, actually, Dante, when you and I saw it. So we're talking about the first Omen, which was made in 2024. And then you say, but the first Omen, which was also made in 1976, starring Lee Remick and Gregory Peck. Some people refer to as the first Omen because actually technically the first Omen movie made in 1976. Mm-hmm. And the first Omen is a prequel set in 1971, taking place preceding the events in 1976 in the Omen. So that there's no confusion, we'll refer to the 1976 Omen and the first Omen as the 2024. But give me your first impressions, everyone. And Alan, you had not seen, we're just going to go around the horn. Alan, you had not even seen it last week when I gave it a very surprisingly positive review. I did not expect to like it as much as I did. Alan, what are your thoughts? And we're going to get to everybody.
Yeah, so of the movies we're talking about, I've only seen the first Omen. I thought it was a serviceable horror film. Relied a lot on jump scares. I think you're right in the sense of, even the discussion of religion wasn't necessarily taken that seriously, and the absence of the Bible, absence of Bible verses, stood out. But at the same time, playing around with, I did like the idea of the fact that they were trying to birth the Antichrist. Did I just spoil it?
Well, I think if you've seen the 1976 Omen, you know that's what it's leading to. So there you go. I guess ultimately it wasn't as scary as I thought it would be, but it definitely had its tense moments. I recall, if I recall correctly, what was the statement that you made at Award This in 2023 in December about not seeing horror films?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it. What was the exact quote? Because it scares the. I forgot.
Jesus. The Jesus.
What's the Jesus? Oh, the living crap out of me. I believe that's what it was.
No, it scares the poop out of me.
Oh yeah, the living poop out of me. Yeah. It does.
Oh,
I would never have seen it if we weren't doing this.
Lorena, what did you think of the first Omen?
Well, let's see. Visually, very stunning. I loved they got that time period of the early 70s down pat, everything from the costuming to the vehicles on the street to that period in the 70s from what my parents have told me about, where there was this big push against the quote unquote establishment, against quote unquote established religion. And I find that very interesting that in that same period of time, you also, they call it like the Jesus movement, but you had the rise of say Calvary Chapel and Chuck Smith. And that's pretty much the background that I come from as pretty much non-denominational with a little bit of a foot in Pentecostalism. But it was nice to look at, an okay plot. As for being scary, not really. Some of the plot was pretty easy for me to figure out from the beginning, and I'm just like, are we really doing that? But at the same time I'm watching it, the thought occurred to me. It's like, why is it Hollywood seems to have the hubris to think that they can create something to bring prophecy into being better than God can? That's just been interesting for me to watch this whole thing where they're trying to birth the Antichrist. I'm like, really? I just kind of thought that something would happen to just boom, spoil their plans, but that part didn't really sit very well with me. And another thing that I really didn't like about this, and I'll contrast this to, say, the Conjuring films, it seems as if Christianity is powerless in the face of evil and in the face of the devil. And in the Conjuring, there's power in that Christianity has to fight against evil. So that part I felt was really missing in this film. So it was a nice popcorn watch, but definitely not Citizen Kane.
Okay,
I feel like that.
Max, what are your thoughts?
So it's It's interesting because I think I'll probably have to separate it into like what I thought about the film as just a cinematic experience, and then also what it did in terms of like faith, the basis of faith, and how there's a line in the film that talks about there are people like us who follow the Church of Christ and his teachings, and then the Church of power. And I think that that was one of the lines that one of the priests had said, and just that dynamic and whatnot. But as a film experience, I agree with y'all's sentiments. I think it is beautifully shot. How the camera moves, how it zooms in, how it's kind of a little bit, it's not handheld at times, but I think Chris, in your initial review, you had said it kind of looks like it's from the 70s. And they really did a good job of portraying that. And with period pieces, it's extremely difficult to get those costume designs, all the cars, all the set pieces. All of that stuff is just incredible in this film. I really liked the acting. Some of the accents, some of the Italian accents were a little off. But cinematically, like whoever the cinematographer is, this was just gorgeous. I mean, lots of God rays in these beautiful cathedrals, in these chapels. You're getting a lot of great emotional scenes with how they position some of the nuns in these churches and whatnot. So for me, I thought it was beautifully stunning to visually look at. And you know what? I didn't mind some of the callbacks that they brought in with the first film, in terms of you had one of the women saying, "This is for you," right? Because in the first film, she says, "This is all for you, Damien." They kind of brought that back a little bit with this one. You also get that first scene where something falls, which is also reminiscent of the priest from the Omen, the 1976 Omen, with that priest. So you get these little callbacks to go, okay, I'm glad that they're trying to have some sort of connection with the 1976 film, but no, like my thing is I hate prequels. I hate the revamps, the rehashes, the whatever, right? Reimaginings. But honestly, I thought that this was respectfully done. I thought that it was well done and well made. So even though it is a prequel, I would recommend it, if not just for the stunning visual effects and some of the performances, especially the lead, our lead girl, who is, I forget her name, Margaret. Yeah, Margaret. So
that's the character's name. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's Nell Tiger Free is her name.
Thank you. Yeah.
Dante, what are your thoughts?
You know what? I agree with Max in a way of I don't like prequels either. I went into this movie really hesitant about it because number one, it's a prequel, but number two, it's a prequel to a horror film, which that's double whammy for me. But I was pleasantly surprised. I actually really liked the movie. I thought, yeah, like everyone said, and I'm going to parrot this, that it was visually stunning to look at. And I felt like it was very well acted. And I like the fact that, there weren't a lot of big names in this movie, other than Bill Nighy, from the pirate movies. And I believe he was in Underworld. And then you had Charles Dance, of course, Tywin Lannister, and he's been in a bunch of movies as well. Alien 3, one of my favorite movies, The Golden Child, but we'll talk about that another time. But no, I really dug this movie. I felt like I did feel like it got a little messy in certain parts, especially when they're explaining the story of the sisters and 666 and all that stuff. It got really messy in those areas, I felt like. But they're trying to do this surprise. It's not the one you think it is kind of thing. And I felt like it didn't work as well as it could have. But other than that, I felt like it was a fine prequel to a great horror film. I felt the tie-in, not giving away spoilers, but there's definitely a direct tie from this movie into the original Omen. I don't want to say the first Omen, into the original Omen. And yeah, overall, I really liked it.
All right, Aaron.
Well, You know, in these sorts of films, I always feel like you know, the theology is a little weak. It's Hollywood's interpretation of theology, and it seems like the screenwriters don't always like really dig in and try to find out, you know, what the meaning of these things actually are. In that way, I do think it benefited the film that they didn't put you know, more scripture in it. Although I think it would have made the kind of the creepiness and the horror and the terror. It would have sold it better if we had scripture in there that backed up the script. But you know, for whatever reason, it wasn't in there. Maybe they didn't want to do the research. Maybe they thought that it was too much trouble. So I was a little disappointed in that. Aside from that, I thought the cinematography was beautiful. There's shots of Rome in there that are just amazing. I was really kind of caught up in the way that the movie looked and the way that it felt, and you know, the way the camera work. It felt like it was right out of the 70s, as you guys were saying. I really enjoyed it, and I did get invested in the story. I didn't get fooled by kind of like the red herring that they were, you know, trying to put out. You know, it was pretty fairly obvious how things were going to go, but that didn't, in this case, it didn't affect my enjoyment. There was a general sense of creepiness throughout. Like it didn't scare me necessarily, but I felt uneasy through a lot of it, which I think, you know, I think was really effective.
Mhm.
So it's really interesting to me. I kind of view it maybe in the same way that I do the Thing prequel, where it doesn't live up to the original, but I think that it was done with respect and reverence, and they tried to make it as close to the original as possible and as complementary. So I don't think that they violated anything from the original film. So I'm looking forward to revisiting the original now that I've seen the first Omen.
Mm.
Well, my biggest issue with the movie, and this is why I wanted to bring on, how many people here are church going on a regular basis? Raise your hands. Okay, so it's 4 out of 6. Okay. I did go to church when I was a kid. I was Catholic, born to Catholic family, went to catechism. And I also saw the Omen movies in original release when they came out, 1976. I was a little kid, saw that movie. It scared the living hell out of me. Okay, then saw all the other films. And I just finished watching the Omen this morning because I wanted to rewatch it. I think the reason that films like The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, the Omen series hit so hard and were so powerful is because they actually included passages from the Bible. I took this screenshot here right off my TV. This appears at the very end of the 1976 original Omen. The movie has ended. I must have seen the movie by now, but before the credits roll, the movie ends with the Latin chanting where they're saying, it sounds like they're saying, "Oh, icky poo." It sounds like they're saying icky poo. I know it's not. It's Latin, but it sounds like icky poo, right? Icky poo. Anyways, so, and the score is so incredible. I think that's the reason the film's so powerful. But here it is, a verse right from the Bible. I'll read it for those listening. Here is wisdom, that him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. From the book of Revelations, chapter 13, verse 18. That is in the credits of the movie. So, and in addition, even movies of that era, even if they weren't religious in theme, religion was a part of the film. Characters would go to church because it's part of their daily lives. And even if you remember, because we're about to get a new Planet of the Apes movie, the very first Planet of the Apes movie from 1976, religion is a big part of it. It's a rewritten version of the Bible from the apes' perspective, and they're reading scripture from their own version of the Bible. So I do believe that religion was a much bigger part of even everyday people's lives. They call it, and I would call myself culturally Christian, right? Like I observe all the Christian holidays, celebrate with my family. I'm just not going to church. So, and Comic Book Girl 19 is watching right now, watching along from my phone on low power mode.
Oh,
You can join on your phone, Danica. Join us if you
But
can.
she's on low power mode. That's the problem.
She's on low power mode.
Yeah, it's not gonna work.
Bummer. Anyways, thank you, Danica. We hope you can join us before the end of the show. But I want to get your thoughts on this. Is the reason that the recent religious horror, I'm including Immaculate, I'm sorry, this is such a long-winded thing. I'm giving examples. But from Immaculate to all this other religious horror, the genre hasn't gone away. Nunsploitation is a huge genre. Look at movies like The Nun, right?
Mhm.
So, but what's missing from all of these movies is religion itself, which as a kid always made it even more terrifying because you could pick up a Bible and you could take that verse and just continue reading. So what's the issue? Was it scarier back then when religion was a bigger part? Is it, what are your thoughts on religious horror effectively kind of excluding the religious part? And I have a follow-up question to that, but just jump in, whoever has strong thoughts about this.
Well, I think.
Oh, go ahead, Max.
I think Lorena kind of brought it up earlier in that there's a strength, there's a power against demonic forces and evil against this world when we are strong in our faith. And with a lot of Christian, films, they tend to, like, even in the Omen, the 1976 version, Chris, you said that you watched that this morning, but remember the scene where they're taking Damien to church and they're like, it's eerie. They start to get closer to the church. They're driving up and Damien just starts going crazy. And the wife keeps saying he's scared, he's trembling, right? And this is literally the devil incarnate into our world. And he is afraid of the church. So I think that was like such a powerful moment for Christians to see, like, our faith and our God frightens, terrifies Satan to the point of where he is just going to try and attack and try and just reach out and hit anything he can, and that is missing from a lot of these films. So I agree with you there, Lorena. But in terms of why those films were a little bit scarier, I think it gets into the real question of, like, why are we here? What is our existence? What is our purpose? Which we all have those questions, I feel like, at one point or another in our lifetime. And those questions may be a little bit scarier as you get older. And like you said, Chris, it's real. When you have biblical texts, you can see something, you can physically, like ghost stories, you go, well, it's just a monster or something. But these things where it's demonic or cult-like, or when it's involving scripture, I feel like it's almost tangible, because these things have happened maybe before. I don't know. I think that might be why it's a little bit scarier. And I think the modern films of today rely too much on just the boo, like the jump scare, and then it's over. And it's like, that's not really, and which is why I think Aaron mentioned it. The first Omen, this film, had just a general, like, my hands were like this on the chair, because it just had this general, like, what's going to happen next? Like, I was just waiting for the next shoe to drop, and that's more creepy and scary in the grand scheme of things. So I guess that's my take.
And two things that I really appreciated: shocking deaths. That's really a trope in the Omen series, where the deaths are sudden and shocking. If you recall, in the original 1976 Omen, David Warner, of so many great things, Time After Time, Tron, you recognize the actor David Warner. He plays a photographer, suffers a horrible accidental death. A lot of it is very Final Destination, right? Like, you get this head chopped off by a plate of glass. The head flips in the air and then shatters the glass. It is the shocking thing. And there are shocking deaths in the first Omen that I thought was like, well, that's just like the original, because they don't really, you kind of can see them coming or what's going to happen. And then horrific with the guy and there will be spoilers in here because, movie opened last Thursday. When the guy with the car, he gets halved.
Yeah.
It was great.
She's like, I've got you.
Yeah, she sure did, didn't she?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh my God. Back to my, the thing that was missing for me is actual religious texts and references to the Bible. And I wonder if is that a reflection of oh yes. And Comic Book Girl 19, Danica says Omen is a predecessor of Final Destination.
Yeah.
I agree, Danica. We were talking about, she hadn't seen the movie yet. We hung out on Saturday and got to see John Waters present Pink Flamingos at the Academy Museum. It was amazing. But like that's the thing, that like a religion to me rooted it in a way where you could read it and like it felt to me, it made it more real, like this could happen. So are we becoming less? I mean, look, and there are stats that prove this. We are becoming less religious as a society in America.
Yes.
Well, I think there's two things at play here, because if we're asking why, the horror films seemed scarier back then, there were a few factors, right? Number one, not everybody back then was a film critic, right? Everyone now is a critic. Everyone now knows what goes on behind the scenes of a film, right? Back then, it's like, you lived in your bubble, and then to escape reality, you go to a movie and you would either laugh, be scared, get horny, or whatever, right? I think we're living in a different time where it's not that easy to scare people anymore. Because back then, you have to remember too that not only did you have religion, you had urban legends that people believed in. You know what I mean? You had like, all these different things that people believed in back then, because we didn't have the tech that we have now. But now, because of technology, I think that's kind of taken away a lot of our fears, at least when it comes to that kind of horror anyway.
I think it's increased mine, Dante.
Well, no. I said when it comes to that kind of horror.
Yeah.
Technology brings a new kind of horror.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the reasons. I think the other reason too is, you guys kind of nailed it when you said that. I think just more people believed back then than they do now. So when you have these scriptures that talk about the dragon coming, right? The beast, it was scary stuff, man. And then you have these earnest films like The Exorcist, like The Omen, like Rosemary's Baby, and that just kind of adds fuel to that fear, because they do include the scriptures in there with it.
That's a really great point, Dante.
Right? So you're thinking, I just read this. This might come true.
Right.
No, I think it's a really good point. I think it speaks to, it speaks to a primal fear. And I think that's why these films continue to resonate today. In the 70s, obviously, they were really big. It was a really dark time for America. We were coming off of Vietnam. The country had kind of like lost its identity. And now here we are, fast forward to 2024, and we're very much in the same spot. I think it's fine that the country is less religious, because I think that religion is a problem. I've always felt that religion is man's attempt to get to God. It's a lot of ritual, and it's a lot of rules and man-made conventions, especially within Catholicism, which is featured heavily in this movie. Whereas a relationship with Christ is God's attempt to reach man. And so I think if we had more of that and we had less religion, we had more individual faith. And I'm not saying that, we shouldn't have, the gathering, at church and fellowship with other believers, and that we shouldn't go out and proselytize to people that are willing to hear the message. I'm not saying any of that, but I'm saying that it is an individual relationship. And that's what Hollywood gets wrong. And that's what a lot of people get wrong, is the church is not the building that you go to. The church is, like Max and I will have church just hanging out and having lunch because we're talking about those issues, and I think that that's the thing that Hollywood fails to understand. And it also fails to understand that, like Lorena said at the very beginning in her intro, we are commanded to not have an attitude of fear. We as believers believe that God is in control. And that all of these terrible things that are happening, God will ultimately use for good. So when you see a movie like this and they just give Satan such power over people, and the believers are completely unable to resist him, and he just had none of that is biblically accurate. It makes for a really good film, and it makes for good creepy horror, but none of that is biblically accurate. And so it would be interesting to see somebody who had a reverence for actual scripture tackle one of these films and what that might look like.
Yeah, it's interesting, Aaron, what you brought up. One of the things, and someone said this in the chat, one of the things that always fascinated me about films like The Omen, like The Exorcist, like Rosemary's Baby, like The Conjuring, is this prominence of the Catholic Church. Now, I am not Catholic, I'm Protestant, but it's kind of, when I look at these films, and like, for example, I'm forgetting which one it was, they're like, oh, it's an exorcism, we have to call a priest, I'm like, no, when two or more are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them, we need to cast this devil out. I'm like, how come that type of thing isn't going on? And going back to what that period of time was in the 70s, yes, you had more people go to church, but it also seems that God has been replaced for a lot of people with government. God has been replaced with technology, and that's one of the trappings that we have in a first world country. I know when I was a kid in church, it's like I didn't really start to pay attention until you started telling stories about, Jesus casting out demons. I'm like, dang, really? That's power right there. And then the one pastor said, you know what? He said, when I saw The Exorcist, I was so scared I went out and got saved.
Wow.
And I said, Mom, can I watch The Exorcist? She's like, no, you absolutely can't.
You're like, but I want to feel what the pastor felt. She's like,
I
no.
want to understand what the pastor said. So years later, I watched that film, and I'm like, okay, now I get it. And granted, I'm not a fan of M. Night Shyamalan that much, but there was a movie he made, I believe, called Devil.
Yeah.
It was these people who were in an elevator, and the narrator is telling the story. And at the end, the narrator is like, don't worry, children, because if the devil is real, then God must be real also. And I'm like, wow. So for me, it's that part of Christianity triumphing over evil, and even take it out of Christianity. And Chris is like a big Indian movie film. Okay. I've seen Indian horror films, and there is this stark, struggle between good and evil. And there's always that triumph of good over evil. That's a universal story that's over there. So it's like, it's a shame that Hollywood doesn't do that the way that they used to. I mean, a long circuitous answer, but yeah, I think it is. They've taken the power of scripture, because like you said, Chris, how creepy is it? You see that Bible verse at the, in the first Omen movie, the original 1976, and you go back to the Bible and you find that. And not only do you read that verse, but you keep reading, and then you start reading all of Revelation.
And I would say that Revelation is more
I was going to say Aaron is going to tell us about that later, I think.
when I was I'll say this. When I was a kid and you read through the book of Revelation, you were like, well, this is very fanciful, and this is very interesting, and very kind of horrific and scary at the idea of these things happening. But you couldn't really, like, there was just certain things like, there's the two witnesses that are killed, and it says, and the whole world viewed their body for so many days. And I was like, well, how is that? As a kid, you were like, how is that possible? I guess like if they ran it on the news, maybe, but but now with social media, with the technology, the advancements and all these things that we have, you understand how that could happen so easily. You understand how the mark of the beast, where no one will be allowed to buy without the mark on their forehead or their hand. You understand how that can be implemented, especially as they were talking about COVID passes and things like that. You see all of these things that are happening with technology that are all kind of like coalescing around the ideas of what Revelations is, and what humanity is said to have to endure in the 7-year tribulation period. And when they work that into films, if you know anything about the Bible and you know anything about the book of Revelations, that speaks to a primal fear of yours, because it's not good times. If you guys haven't read Revelations, it's not a good 7-year period.
And the other thing we have to look at too is, like, with a lot of these films, especially this genre of film, is, I consider this more, and I don't know, maybe I coined this phrase, I don't know yet, but it's more like Catholic mythology, more than Christianity. Like, I don't see Christianity in these movies, right? It's more like Catholic mythology, meaning, and I hope I'm not offending a bunch of Catholics out there, but I'm saying what Hollywood does is it makes Catholicism a mythology, right? And you have these archetypes, right? And you have these layers of the church, right? And there's a lot of room to play with things, right? If you're not going to follow or really adhere to the Bible, then you can kind of just make up your own stuff, right? And that's kind of what we got with Immaculate, right? Because Immaculate had nothing to do with Satan, really. It was more about science. But with the Omen, this was a take on Catholic mythology, right?
And I think
so that's another reason why I guess it doesn't hit, or look, if we go into a horror film thinking everything's going to be okay, then that horror film failed.
Yeah.
Okay, that horror film failed. Like, you should go into a horror film thinking, oh no, everything's going to go wrong, and I'm going to be scared to death. So I get why there's zero hope in these movies. You know what I mean?
Yeah, drama, lack of drama.
And you got to set up the sequel too. So if good triumphs, you don't have your sequel.
Exactly.
Well, I think it is really interesting how you see these, like you said, Dante, these layers of like the corruption of the Catholic Church that was portrayed in this film.
Right.
Because I myself am not Catholic, but I know a lot of my friends who have gone into the Catholic Church, and they believe that like that is their saving grace. And to see Hollywood kind of portray the Catholic Church as like for example, one of the last scenes in the film is like this really the camera pans across this cult like gathering of all the people in the hoods, and they're all waiting for the big event to happen, right? And I was just uneasy the entire time, and I was like, God, you hate these people in the film, right? In the film, it just portrays them as these evil, just like cruel, vile people, and it does have that awful, weird, creepy nature to it, because they're all just there's nothing going on behind their eyes. And I wonder what Catholics would say about that when they see that portrayal, because like for me, if you guys have ever seen the movie Outlaw King with Chris Pine, Outlaw King was about after the death of William Wallace, and it was following Robert the Bruce. And Robert the Bruce was an extremely Christian man, so much so that before battle he would give great speeches to his men saying that God is with us, and that the angels are with us on this day, and we fight for God's grace. We fight for the glory of God. What does the film do? Chris Pine says, I don't care what you fight for. God is not with us this day. Right? And it's like, okay, are we really doing this again? And it's just, it's their revision of the Catholic Church and the Christian historical figures just seems so false and so deconstructed. So to your point though, Dante, I think that is a really interesting term though, the Catholic mythology, because to actual Catholics, I'm sure that they watch this and just are, they just think it's absurd, but I'm not sure.
But also add to that, and I really hope I don't get in trouble for this.
Oh boy.
Hot take. Here we go.
Okay, guys. No. Really, I guess this is a kind of a hot take. Unfortunately, the way the climate is, the social climate is in this country, is really Christianity is the only religion that you can do this with, right? Like, you will never see this done with Judaism. You'll never see this done with Islam. You won't see this done with other religions, because Christianity is the only one you can make fun of or play with. You know what I mean? So it's kind of interesting that, and unfortunately, and they kind of brought it on themselves. Again, sorry, Catholics, but a lot of crazy stuff goes on in the Catholic Church in real life. Okay. And so again, stuff that leads to great horror films. And unfortunately, in this country, you can only do this with that particular religion, right? You can't make a horror film about Muslims. You can't make a horror film about Jews, right? I mean,
maybe not a horror film, but I'm actually I'm working on a comic with Wes Azadani right now as the writer. First time writer, but he's obviously thought about the story a long time. And he has written this really great survival horror story set during the Crusades with the main characters being Muslim, and and you think like, oh, it's going to be like very like, anti-Christian, but that's not really the point of the movie or the point of the book. The point of the book is that, here he's going to show some positive Muslim male role models. But the story is about horror. So he is, I think you can do stories like that, but I think that, obviously it takes somebody like him who is of that faith to kind of walk that line and portray the faith respectfully while also adding in these horrific elements. So
if we're talking about the liberties though, right? Because the thing is, like I said, you can't do that with really any other religion, right? Like, I mean,
let me speak to that.
Well, I'll just say real quick, I've seen the movie The Vigil. I just looked up Jewish horror films.
Mhm.
Well, I've seen it. I think we interviewed the director, and here's a couple of the other titles: The Golem, The Offering, Hanukkah, Jerusalem with a Z, Demon, The Golem.
None of these.
But if we look up Muslim
There is
horror,
Muslim horror films. I looked that one up too.
Oh,
there
interesting.
are.
Oh wow!
There they are.
Okay,
Oh
then
yeah, the
I,
gin. Yeah, the
Did
gin would
make
definitely.
sense. Yeah.
These are
But
not as broadly popular.
they're not.
as-
Yeah, I mean they're not well known.
Yeah, they're not.
And
as
Dante
well-
may still be absolutely right in that, yes, they are horror films, but they're not actually like delving into and changing the message of the religion or in any way like
Right.
mocking or playing
Right.
around with the those conventions.
Yeah, let me speak to why Christianity tends to get it the most. I watched recently a stand-up special with Jimmy Carr, and he told a very blasphemous joke, and the audience kind of murmured and goes, "Oh, there are Christians in the audience. What are you gonna do? Forgive me?" And and then I remember
Mm.
I remember even Penn
Absolutely.
Jillette-
This was not said in the South, was it?
and then I remember
Okay, I'm
Penn
just
Jillette-
saying.
I remember Penn Jillette saying that the reason that him and Teller are so open to mocking Christianity in their show is for the same reason. It's because we're not going to fight back. We're going to forgive them, but they know they can't do it about Islam. They could do it less about if they do it about Judaism, they'll come off as anti-Semitic. So it's kind of within the nature of our religion of this idea of forgiveness. That kind of opens us up to it.
The idea
the
of
other
turn
cheek.
the other cheek is not one that is present in many other many other faiths.
Yeah.
Or
Dying for
definitely-
one's sins.
Yeah.
Or, giving one's life as the greatest act of love. That's not exactly a universal, religious mandate.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's solely Christian.
Nice. Well, what do you guys think? That one of the ideas I thought that was very interesting in the first Omen was the fact that the church is the one actively trying to bring forth,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
devil, Satan, whatever, into the world to actually make people more religious.
Mm.
That was just an interesting wrinkle we didn't see in the other Omen movies, but is included in this one. You actually, learn what the motivation is. It's the church that's making
Mhm.
all of this happen. What were your thoughts on that?
It's not unheard of. I mean, this happens in evangelicalism and Protestantism when you have these faith healers, who go out making money off of being able to heal people. So the idea of a corruptible church is kind of an age-old tale. It's there. Greed, sex, power. It's all those temptations are there in the church.
Well, I don't think I would be doing, we would be doing the conversation justice without mentioning, your Joel Osteens, right? Your televangelists who will literally steal, like he is a wolf in sheep's clothing. I mean, and I wonder if that is almost worse than someone who is actively sinning and knows what they're doing is wrong and just keeps doing it, as opposed to someone who believes that what they're doing is just or is right or is in the eyes of God. This wonderful thing that he's like taking thousands of dollars from individuals who may not have that, right? Or that your salvation is based upon how much money you give him, right? But then during times of crisis, Joel Osteen blocks his church off. No, we're not going to allow people to stay here and find restitute or whatnot. We're going to block our walls off from the church and everything. And so things like that, where you do see it in a lot of these televangelists. And it is really sad, but I would almost argue that those are people that are more dangerous because you see a snake with a rattler and you go, oh, I better stay away from that. Right. That's dangerous. That's going to bite me. I could probably. You see like a cuddly, nice teddy bear, and you go, "Oh, that's really sweet," and that thing is going to hurt you even more, right? And I think that's what is scary about having in this film the church be the ones to bring about Damien, because it is their will, their power, and they're only doing it for that power. I think, like I said, that quote in the film talks about there's the church of Christ that follows Christ and his teachings and wants to bring about the kingdom, and then the church of power that does this just so that they can stay in power. And I wonder if the film was trying to comment on that or trying to say something of that nature in our world today. But I'm not really sure that I would say that churches are in power at all right now. I would say the government is more in power than churches or any other establishment. But
Well, it's very narcissistic, when you think about it. And not only is it just with televangelists, there's plenty of also local churches who do the same thing. There's certain denominations where they are more about how much money that they can collect rather than how many souls that they can save. And there's also a study out there that says just unfortunately, how many people who are pastors are crazily, malignant narcissists who they feel that they are not subject to God. They feel that God's will is subject to them. So sorry, go ahead, Aaron.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's why, Christ in the Bible warns so often of false prophets. And, and I shared with Dante the other day, the passage that basically says, when they stand before Christ for judgment, there'll be many who say, oh, didn't we serve you? Didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't we do all these things for you? And Christ will say, depart from me, I never knew you. And that's because of people that I believe, like Joel Osteen, who are concerned with, the Bible says you cannot serve God and mammon meaning money. And that's who Joel Osteen serves. He serves the God of money. And that's what he's interested in. And he has led these people astray. And I think Max is right. I think that the judgment for people like that will be far harsher than those who just were lost in their sin, from a biblical perspective. And I would hate to be one of those people. And I think that's the really interesting thing about these films, and the idea that the church is actually working to bring about the Antichrist. And you can see how, from a biblical perspective, someone could delude themselves into thinking that that's a good thing, because they'd be like, well, I'm helping to fulfill the promise that Christ made. Christ doesn't need you to do that. God doesn't need you to help fulfill his prophecy. He will take care of that himself. If you're a believer, you believe that. But I can see people like making that jump in logic. And that's why I think it works as a narrative device, because, we see people trying to do that. We see it in society. We see that they're pushing it, and there is an idea behind there that's good, which is faith is made perfect in weakness. Faith is made perfect in persecution. America has not had any real persecution in so long. The church here is fairly weak. We see it, like Chris was talking about, how less people are identifying as having any sort of religion, and you see the direction that society is heading. But I also think that in these moments, as things get darker, there's just a huge chance for revival. And I'm starting to see, kind of an awakening. I'm seeing marches of Christians in Santa Monica on Easter, in Santa Monica.
Right.
Joe Rogan is on his show saying about, he's come around to the idea that the country needs Jesus. You've got Russell Brand out there talking about how, he's starting to really look at the Christian faith and see that there are things that are valuable there. And, I would just say that if you're not going to, if you live your life by biblical principles, your life is only going to get better. You're only going to improve things in your life. So don't look to other believers. Don't look to people like the Westboro Baptist Church. Don't look to your Joel Osteens. Don't look to these false prophets. The model of Christianity is Christ. And if you look to Christ, you will not find a liar. You will not find a hypocrite. You will find God.
And I will say, your life may get better, it may become more fulfilled, and you may find a purpose, but it will get at times more difficult. And that is something that is promised, like in the faith, unfortunately. But like through our suffering comes perseverance, and through perseverance comes character, and through character comes hope. And that's in Romans 5. So like we are going to experience struggles in this life. And I think that sometimes people say Christianity is just all butterflies and rainbows and God loves you and everything's perfect. And it's like, we have our faith because when things do get rough, we know that our Savior went through even worse things, and we can look to him for light. But do you mind if I ask you guys a question real quick? Because I think this is, I love this conversation. I would love to get y'all's take on this. Why do you think that, kind of to your point, Alan, earlier about how Christians can be portrayed terribly in films, right? Or they can be seen as like they're the evil ones, right? Why is it that we never get a good, like a protagonist that has like a strong faith, and he's convicted by his faith, and he believes wholeheartedly in Christ, and he's like a good wholehearted courageous, strong leader protagonist in a film? Is it because that people believe that Christians are oppressive and they're like the evil, because what do we hear on Twitter and all the news sites all the time is, white Christian conservatives are the worst people in the world right now. And is that why we're not seeing that in Hollywood? But they're so quick to be able to throw them as the villain in any film as a villain.
Well, you'll see it, but you'll only see it in a quote unquote religious film. Right? Like you won't see it in like a major motion picture or a studio film. It's always like, a privately funded religious movie where you'll see a Christian man or a Christian woman be an actually good person, strong in her faith. You'll only see that in private movies. Privately funded.
To that point, there aren't exactly Christian filmmakers in the Hollywood system making making.
That's the other thing.
I mean, that's the thing you have to have. Why?
It's an oxymoron.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess that is sad that we don't have a lot of individuals within film that are Christians or just within entertainment in general that are, preaching their faith or whatnot. And nor would I want anyone to be, because then what better are we if we're trying to convert everyone and be like, if you're not this type of person, then we're no better than the people in Hollywood right now trying to preach to us and say like, you're all bad if you don't believe this thing or whatnot.
Hollywood tolerates Christians. They don't like Christians. They tolerate them, and they only tolerate them in small doses. You know what I mean? Like if you win the award, you could thank your God and everything, but that's all they want to hear from that.
And F off.
And your God is probably Harvey Weinstein if you're Meryl Streep.
And not to go off on a tangent, but at the same time, the church has done some pretty horrible things, and even as recent, and it just becomes fodder for the stuff. Yeah, I mean, to me, the only person I'll mention Mel Gibson. He tends to be doing these kind of religious films, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that he's a recovering everything, and he's a guy who's found whose life has changed because of faith, and yet Hollywood can't seem to forgive him.
It also doesn't mean that he's perfect, and I think that's the thing that a lot of these so-called Christians do that turn people off, is that they present themselves as perfect and pious, and they sit in judgment, and that is not the message of the Bible. That is not the message of Christ. The message is that as as these people are, you once were, and you're not better because you didn't do anything. Christ died on that cross for you. The victory is his. You are saved by grace, and therefore you should extend grace to these other people, and you should deal with them in compassion, and you should yearn for them to be saved the way that you have been saved.
I mean, we're seeing it play out right now on Twitter with that OnlyFans girl who, became a Christian, gave up OnlyFans, gave up making $9 million a year to become a Christian. And you see how she's getting slammed by quote unquote Christians on social media, right?
Google her. What's her name again? I'll Google her.
Her name's Nala something.
I forget her name, but it's
it's from The Lion King.
Yeah, it just reminds me of so many Pharisees who just want to sit in judgment and look down their nose at it. And it's like, who are you to put restrictions on how people come to Christ? And that's so off-putting.
Yeah, we forget Mary Magdalene.
Yeah, we forget about Mary. Yes. And they used to give Jesus a bunch of crap because he would hang out with, tax collectors and harlots and, and he said, I didn't come to judge the world. I came to save the world. But one of the things that I want to bring up, because you guys are talking about like how they're blaming, white Christians and everything. I said, I find it interesting in Hollywood. Well, they will love to shame white Christians about slavery. But you will not ever see a movie about Muslims being involved in slavery, which was infinitely worse than what went on.
And let's be honest, slavery was the norm the world over. And slavery
one
actually
point, yeah.
comes from the Slavs, who were the first slaves. So white people have been enslaved too. That's where so it's not unique to any culture. It happened the world over. In America, we had slavery. Like I said, it was the world norm. But within 100 years, this Christian nation that was founded on Christian principles said, you know what, this isn't right. And we had a civil war over it. So how quickly did our country reject that? Within just a couple of generations, we were done with it, and it was worth people, fighting and dying for. So, we're not a perfect nation by any means, especially, now. I think that we're in some real trouble, but let's not pretend that this is the worst place on the face of the earth. This country has given more opportunity to more people and lifted more people out of poverty than I would say any other nation on earth.
Exactly.
But we also forget that the great abolitionists of that time were Christians.
Yes.
At least the Western abolitionists were. I mean, that was their drive, and that was their belief that no man should be a slave, and they were the ones putting their necks out there because that was their source of living, having slaves and running businesses based on slavery.
And people will say, like, oh, the Bible, the Bible supports slavery because it talks about slavery, and it talks about, like, if you were a slave, then just do your best, as it tells everybody to do. Like, do your best to represent your faith. This is where God has put you. This is your this is your struggle. God will use your struggle as a witness to others. So be joyful in whatever it is that whatever your circumstances are. Be joyful in the Lord. That's not a recommendation of slavery. That's a recognition that slavery existed.
It's a recognition of, the reality that is out there. So I bring up that whole point just to show how hypocritical Hollywood is.
It's interesting. Most people who are religious in Hollywood, you don't know. They're closeted. They're like Mark Wahlberg, it kind of comes out. You can tell by the choices of movies that they make. But most religious people in Hollywood happen to be closeted. And it really has bothered me because I've known people who are religious in the industry who face prejudice. It's bizarre to me. And I've seen this since I was a kid. That's why while I may have issues with religion, I believe that something exists outside of us that it's almost arrogant to think that we can explain it, right? And a religion is a way for man to kind of connect to that, right? I mean, there's that meme, I'm sure you've seen that meme where it's just like, I don't believe in God. You can't see God. Well, can you see gravity? Can you see love? Can you see things that exist that we acknowledge exist in the world? They just aren't visible to the naked eye. So
the stand-up comedian Pete Holmes has a great bit about this, where he says that there's the God people, and then there's the nothing people. And he goes, the God people believe that we are created, that God breathed life into the universe and created everything, and that's where everything comes from. The nothing people think that nothing did it. They think that God doesn't exist. And he goes, well, you know what definitely doesn't exist? Nothing. And if your nothing suddenly explodes into everything, that's a pretty magical nothing. And he said, and by the end of your life, you ask the nothing people, well, what happens when you die? And they say nothing. And he goes, oh, you mean you merge back with your creator?
Wow.
Do you want to grab some super chats while we're?
Yeah. I unfortunately, I know that Alan and Lorena have to leave early. I want to go through the super chats we have, then we'll pivot back to our conversation because the chat's on fire. And I really appreciate you. I love having conversations with people about this stuff. And I even recall as a kid, I had neighbor friends I played with as a kid that were from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Then I had a girl around the corner. She and I were into books, and she was Jewish. And I remember having friends that go, why are you friends with those people? And I didn't understand why I shouldn't be friends with people who we may not all share the same beliefs. So, I have a friend in the industry. His name is Jeremy Kuhn. He's the producer of Napoleon Dynamite. I met him it was 2005, 2006. After he'd done Napoleon Dynamite, we bonded, and I don't understand this. And I've seen it in Hollywood. I saw it at G4, where there were a couple people at G4 who were religious, and other people had problems. And give me a straight answer as to why you have a problem with this person. I don't get it. So this is a topic that I care about, and I appreciate everyone on here, your honesty at wherever you are in your spiritual journey. That's the most popular answer. If you look, not that I'm online dating or anything, but if under religion it says I'm spiritual, no, that's it. People just say spiritual. It's like that might as well be the default setting. Anyways, let's not get into my sad life. Thank you, Alan. For this. Here we go. Joshua McDonald for $4.99 says, "Look at this panel. What a win getting Aaron Sparrow." But then there's Max. That pick is a little low T. Just kidding. Always happy to see my boys.
Hey, go. Josh. Thanks, brother.
And MG for £5. A film about religion, but not a horror that creeped me out was The Devils, starring Oliver Reed, directed by Ken Russell. The Devils is one of the scariest nunsploitation church movies I've ever seen. Oh, wow. MG, thank you for that. Recommend that movie. The Devils, I think it's from 71 or 72. And it's directed by Ken Russell. Brilliant movie. Scared the crap out of me. James Heikkinen for $4.99 says, "Would love y'all to touch on Exorcism of Emily Rose, my favorite in this particular niche category." Is anyone?
Let me just say that. Let me just say, Scott Derrickson, who wrote and directed Exorcism of Emily Rose, we went to the same Christian college. Nice. He went to Biola. He went to Biola. I went to Talbot School of Theology, which is their graduate school.
Nice. And he directed Doctor Strange, and then
yes, he did
do Doctor Strange 2, which was very smart. And he ended up doing the Black Phone, which is fantastic.
That's cool. I love that.
The Black Phone is
so good.
So good. One of the best horror films of.
I'll have to check out Emily Rose. I've never seen
Pretty
it.
Chill Dude 1313 for 2 says, "Cheers, people. Much love, Bula." Carnell. Hey, Carnell. Always good to see you for 5. Hail, Chris and the Versus panel. Loving this discussion. Just sending a super chat and some prayers for Danica's power to come back on. Well, if she doesn't make it this week, we'll have Danica on for another show.
And she could still dress as a nun too. So.
She can, she'll dress as a nun to make up for the last time when she wasn't here. Thanks, Carnell. That's great. Nathan Cassidy for $4.99. The main issue is sectarians seem to think that the church is that it's a cult, which is ironic for the home of Scientology and the woke cult. There you go. David Smart for 5 says the Omen reboot was poop and Immaculate was terrible. Haha, my girl went John Wick in that church. Okay. And then Kalechi, okay, for 20. Hey, thank you. That's very generous. I think that's a bad example on Joel Osteen. If he had let homeless into the church, who would clean up after them? Not to knock at homeless people. They are not particularly clean. That's his church. Let the government provide more places.
That's
Fair
not,
point.
that's the point of the church, though. That is the point
exactly.
of the church. And it wasn't just homeless people. It was people that were displaced by a flood.
Yeah.
So even if you're saying, well, like the homeless people are dirty or they're drug addicted or they're dangerous, we're not to have an attitude of fear, and we are to reach out in charity. Jesus cast demons out of a very violent man that was assaulting people that came by on the road. And he told his disciples, you can do this. Like the Holy Spirit has given you power to do this. What I'm doing is also gifted to you, and cast out demons. I think the problem is that Joel Osteen couldn't cast out a demon if his life depended on it. That's just my personal opinion based on what I've seen. Obviously, I'm not in a position to judge his soul. That's for God to do. But when you are a Christian, there are supposed to be fruits of the Spirit. You are supposed to, people are supposed to be able to look at you and recognize that there is something different about you. There is something different about the way that you live your life. You're not perfect, but there is an effort. And so I would say to any of you that are kind of like questioning, if you want to know if Christianity is real, or if there are real Christians around you, look at the way that they live their lives, look at the choices that they make. Don't expect them to be perfect, but look at how they try, and that'll tell you everything that you need to know. 2 quick super. Hey, we have a special guest in our. I see him. This is okay. This is going to be good.
Well, he's a promoted panelist, so
yes, I know. All of my panelists are special. Ginger Adventure for 5 says, Chris, I think you got a good thing going with this Versus panel. Good on Film Critic itself, but also bringing to light the cultural zeitgeist. We pretty much talk about that all the time. And Pilgrim Media. So thank you for that. For 2, I was taken to The Exorcist at 14. Barf bags. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And hey, joining the panel, Odin of Easter,
Hey.
OMB
Hey,
Reviews.
Odin.
Odin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Sorry, it took me a while to get the kids down. So
Oh, that's all good. Just appreciate you being here. And I'm going to leave an opening now. I know, Lorena, you gotta
I've got
take
10. So
And Alan, you got 10 more minutes?
yeah.
Stick around. Okay, cool. Lorena, you said 4:10, so
Yeah, I got a heart out.
it's okay. It's
All
okay.
right. Bye, Lorena.
So nice to
Subscribe
finally meet you,
Lorena's
Lorena.
channel, please. Yeah, like what else do you have going on, Lorena?
Well, let's see. What day is it? Okay, yeah. So Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern, I have my Spice Lounge discussion show. Special guest, we're going to have WDW Pro, and we're going to be talking about all that stuff. You know, Bob Iger said, you know, they weren't going to lean into the woke stuff anymore. Psych. Yes, he is. So we're
Yeah,
Well,
going
it
to
depends how you define it. But
Good old bumbling Bob.
yeah, AI.
Bob. I
AI
like that.
questions, you know. So we're gonna have that on Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern. Please do stop by. Also, Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern, I'm gonna have my Epic Universe planning live stream. So if you're planning to check out Epic Universe when it opens here, Universal Orlando, we're going to talk about all the options that are out there, questions about the area, all kinds of stuff like that. And at 7 p.m. Eastern time, going to be having my 7K subscriber celebration. Yes, I will be cosplaying. Thank you. Thank you. I'll be cosplaying as Tifa Lockhart because that was the deal that I made if I hit 7K. So hopefully you guys can come by for that. Thank you.
Great. Have a good rest of your
Thanks,
afternoon.
Lorena.
Hey,
Thank
thank
so
you.
much.
Take care,
care now.
everyone. Thanks,
Bye now.
chat.
Cool.
yeah. By the way, I should say we are 30 viewers away on YouTube from hitting 666 viewers.
oh goodness.
So I like to
Oh,
reach
no.
out to the prayer
Take a
partners. out
screenshot if you
there.
get to 666
gosh.
viewers.
Let's go to 777 instead.
There we go. There we
It's
go.
more. It's a better number.
It's so funny to me how people are like so paranoid about that. They're like, you know, like I've actually had people who are like, you know, you've rung them up for something and it comes up to 666 and they're like, can you just charge me for something else? And I'm like, it's just a number on a receipt.
The
This
love
isn't
scam.
like I understand, you know, it has biblical connotations.
It
but
holds
trust
no
me, your
power
receipt-
over us.
Your
No,
receipt
no.
is fine.
Relax, people. It's a Happy Meal, okay? not the mark of the beast.
Oh, you can't get a Happy Meal for 666 in California anymore.
Not anymore. Now, I don't know if I don't think I didn't do this on purpose, but it seems that all of the people with very, very short cut hair are on the bottom. All the hair people with hair. That just happened accidentally.
Oh yeah, sure. Pure accident. Yeah.
Odin, I'm so happy. We've been on streams before, obviously, FNT, other shows, Popcast and whatnot. And we had an interesting discussion by Twitter DMs saying that I really want you to talk about this because I want to hear your point of view. I asked if you would go see this movie, the first Omen. I'm sure you've seen other religious themed horror films in the past. You said you refused to go see it.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me why. Tell everyone why.
So it's always been a thing for me where, you know, there's that one general principle that I'm generally not a fan of horror films. I've never been drawn to them. But especially when it comes to anything dealing with a demonic element, I try to stay away from those as much as I possibly can. And it really comes down to, this is not necessarily something where you have to do this as a Christian, or in my case, as a Catholic. It's just something that I choose to do. But it's always better to stay away from that stuff than to even, you know, remotely entertain it. And so for me, in my own life of faith, when I have a firm belief in the presence of the demonic and, you know, have seen the accounts of exorcists and people who actually do this for a living, and some of the things that they talk about are sometimes the ways that demonic influences can first start, like demonic, there's different processes by which demonic possession happens. It doesn't just, you don't just get possessed right away, right? It's first off with demonic influence, and then demonic obsession, I think, is the next step, and it goes on and on. Basically, demon works at you, you know, slowly over time. And so for me, it's like, I'd just rather stay away from it altogether and not even leave the door cracked open, because as the old saying goes, you leave the door cracked open, something can come through. So that's why I stay away from Ouija boards, and not because the Ouija boards are possessed or anything, because that's clearly not the case. They're just toys. But if you open yourself up to a demonic element, then you leave that possibility of something happening. And so I'd rather not deal with that. And that's why it took me until I was 4 or 5 years ago, the first time I ever watched The Exorcist. And it was because my channel made me watch it. And the whole time I was just like, yeah, I know why I have not watched this movie, and I never want to see it again. Thank you very much.
What were your thoughts on it? Because that's such a classic. Most people have seen it, and probably like myself, at too young an age. A lot of people, but what were your thoughts? What did you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many thoughts about it, because I thought that the effects were a bit dated in different ways. Obviously, it came out a while ago at this point. I've always loved the score, because the score is just it's one of those scores that just sticks with you. It's so simplistic, and yet it's also so powerful at the same time. So it has all these different elements that I actually enjoy. The acting is very good. The way in which it presents demonic influence, I think, is also, most times it's kind of Hollywoodized a little bit, right? It's turned into something where, like, okay, I'm not exactly sure if that's what would actually happen. If you want a really good explanation or a really good showing of what demonic influence and possession looks like, that film Nefarious that came out last year is actually it's one of the most accurate portrayals of what that actually looks like. So it's not like the spinning head with the green vomit going out. Though of course for people who are fans of movies, it's going to be exciting to see and be like, oh my goodness, right? That ick factor going on. But I definitely think that there's a lot of good objective things. But yeah, ultimately, I walked away from it saying, I don't ever want to watch this again. I don't want to think about it again. It took me a while, actually, to really get that thing out of my mind, because it is very creepy, and it does a very good job in creeping you out. And even with the dated stuff, right? Just because it makes you think, oh my gosh, like especially that conversation when it's the doctors trying to look at it from a psychological point of view. And the whole time you're sitting there saying, it ain't psychological. You're just like, you haven't even seen everything yet. And you're just like, oh, they don't even know. They don't even know what they're about to get into. Overall, I enjoy it for that part, but I have no desire to ever watch it again.
Can I tell a secondhand story that I think is just kind of interesting about demonic possession? So Lorena had mentioned Chuck Smith and the Jesus movement at the beginning of the stream, and Chuck Smith is a very famous pastor in here in California. He passed on a few years ago. Just a really like sweet and kindly man, and if you hear his voice, like there's just such kindness in it. It's like listening to a dad. It just fills you with this warmth. And he was recently played in the film by Kelsey Grammer. There is a story that one of his pastors told where they were, the pastors were meeting at the church, and a woman came to the church and said that she believed that she was demon possessed. And so the pastor sat down with her, and they were like, okay, well, we're going to pray with you. And when they started to pray with her, she started to go into, the things that we would associate with demonic possession. She started to speak in another voice. She started to curse them and spit and just became like a nuisance. And then she got up and she started attacking them, violently. And so these pastors, all men that were much bigger than her, were just trying to restrain her and get her down into a chair, including Raul Reese, who is a martial artist. And she was throwing them around the room, these grown men. And finally, they were able to subdue her enough. They were able to pray over her. And they said they felt that the presence left, that the presence was cast out. And they said right after that happens, Chuck comes walking in to start the meeting, not knowing what has happened. There's furniture broken. There's books on the floor. All of the pastors are like sweating and like doubled over, like exhausted. And she's just like, oh, so nice to meet you, pastor. And he's like, oh, hello, sister. How are you? And, and blah, 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 and greeting her and just having this really nice conversation with her while all of the pastors there are just like, oh man, like what just happened? So I always thought that was just a really interesting story and kind of funny in its own way. But yeah, I got called a heathen in the chat. Thank you for that, for me saying that.
For you and Calvin Chapel
on a retail receipt is just a number. I'm sorry that upsets you, but that number does have power biblically. It doesn't have power over the believer. And in the context of a receipt, I don't believe it has any power. I don't think it means that your Happy Meal is demonically possessed.
Only if you let it. Just like
although it is certainly unhealthy.
It's just like with the Ouija board, right? There's no demon. Like every Ouija board comes with its own demon. Get yours today, right? That's not. It's more of
what
like
kind of toys did you get in your Happy Meal?
Well, let me tell you,
Demonic possession from Parker Brothers.
but it's all
Alan,
about how you open your.
Yeah, I have to go. So
Alan, yeah, I know you got to go, but one quick message before you go, a special message from the former governor of the state of California.
Hello, everyone. This is AI Arnold. We would like you to hit the like button and please subscribe. We need to get the boys to 169,000. Isn't that right, Alan?
69. That's right. That's right.
All right, Alan, I'll see
That
you.
looks so real.
I'll
I'll
see
see
you.
you in like an hour and a half. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Alan and I are going to see Civil War tonight.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So
Yeah. I think it'll be something we're not expecting it to be. That's the
exactly. So,
Mm.
all right.
Okay.
See you later. Take care,
Bye,
Alan.
Alan.
Thanks
Bye.
again.
Okay.
Bye bye. Hey,
Um,
Odin, I want to bring up. You weren't here for this, but
Mhm.
have you seen the original Omen, 1976?
No.
You have not.
No.
Have you
As
seen
I said,
any of the Omen films?
I no, I have not. Yeah, as I said, like it took me just to watch a film like The Exorcist. It took my channel like pulling my teeth out basically to watch it even just 4 years ago, and I haven't really done it. Like the closest I've gotten to a demonic horror film recently has been Nefarious.
Right. Well, this may or may not convince you, but in the original 1976 Omen, starring Gregory Peck and Lee Remick, the thing that I felt was missing from the new Omen film, the first Omen that opened last weekend, the thing that was missing for me was actual Bible quotes and even just religious texts, because I feel like it gives the film much more weight. In addition to the score, I think the music from the Omen films has been so fantastic. But the actual inclusion of quotes from the Bible here, I'm going to get your comment on this. And this frightened me to death as a kid, because after having seen the Omen, and then I could pull out a Bible and then actually read this quote, "Here is wisdom, let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Book of Revelation, chapter 13, verse 18. I'm curious what your thoughts are. And for those in the chat, we showed this earlier in the show. Do you have any thoughts on this? And have you read further in that chapter and verse?
So the first thing I always like to go to different translations, because sometimes sometimes the translations that can be used aren't necessarily. So the one that I have here is wisdom. He that hath understanding, let him count the number of the beast, for it should be the number. For it is the number of a man, and the number of him is 666. The numeral letters of his name shall make up this number. So basically, just again, when you think about ancient Judaism or just Judaism in general, names, each letter had a numerical value to it. So one of the reasons why, for instance, you find in the generations of Jesus in the genealogies, why you have so many generations in between is because the number that is used to split the generations is the numerical value of David. And that's connecting Jesus to being from the line of David. And so the other important thing with Revelation, because I'm sure all of y'all have heard with today being the day of the eclipse, right? People have been trying to say, oh, signs of the apocalypse is upon us, right? And my favorite thing about it is, so apparently you kind of forgot the memo that Revelation is an apocalypse, like Daniel from the Old Testament is an apocalypse. And what that means is that it's a deeply symbolic work meant to give hope to a persecuted people. Okay, well, who is this written for? The persecuted Christians of the first century, right? And so I think that also helps to better understand, because whenever you hear talk about a lot of the beast, for instance, those are referring to the earthly powers. Like it's referring to Rome, it's referring to these different places. And so whenever I see those things, typically my mind doesn't go like the Antichrist Omen, I guess, the Hollywood direction, but more of I wonder what that actually meant when it was being written, right? Because clearly there was a intention behind it.
Well, and it's also, like I said, too, where, you go back to, it being a Catholic mythology versus religion. You know what I mean? Like it's easy to romanticize this stuff as being like, prophetic or makes good horror films, right? But it's not necessarily translated in the right way where it really means anything, at least when it comes to our future You know what I mean? It's not prophetic in that way. It's just it makes for good stories.
Really good question here brought up in the chat from Jimmy Francis. A few films of protagonists finding their faith. Contact, Theory of Everything, Signs. I don't care what anybody says. Whatever. I really love the movie Signs.
No, I agree. I liked it as a character piece. I really liked it as a believable like sci-fi alien race that's mastered interstellar travel, but can't open doors and is killed by water and came to a water planet. I don't buy it, but as a character piece, I really enjoyed it.
I mean, just it was a horror film I could watch with my kids because it's not super gory, right? Like, and I just find movies like that interesting. And Contact, I've always loved Jodie Foster. The fact that it was all based on. You have to take it as faith. I saw what I saw, right? And her relationship with Matthew McConaughey, being a man of the cloth, I thought it's very interesting to play with those ideas. So maybe that's another discussion that we can have.
And one thing also that I forgot, because obviously I wanted to double check a couple things, is that the number 666, if we know that they equate to numbers or that numerical values relate to letters in Hebrew and obviously within the early Christian community, that number represented Nero Caesar, who was the one persecuting at the time, right? He also was the person whose face was on the Roman coin of the empire, which was present during the time in which the book of Revelation was being written. So it makes a lot of sense too, where it's like, okay, there's that historical context. And the only thing I would push back on just a little bit is that having no relevance to our future, it's mostly just because it's timeless, right? It's the word of God, and so therefore it is always going to be relevant to past, present, future.
Oh yeah, and I didn't mean it that way. I meant in a way of it's not like a prophecy of look for these things to come, and then they're going to happen. Whenever people say that, I always say I'm just going to go back to when Jesus said, "You will not know the hour." I mean, it's
well, the Bible too is if you can take the words of the great prophet George Lucas, who said it's like poetry, it rhymes. The illustrations that are in the Bible, the early books, characters like David, characters like Moses, they are pictures of Christ. There's the themes that repeat themselves that are, everything's pointing towards Christ. So, when you have this reference to Nero Caesar, it's also referring to the persecution that will come in the future. All of those things just echo throughout the different books of the Bible. And it's one of the reasons that it's kept theologians interested for so long, is because there's so many depths to explore. The basic Bible message, it can be boiled down simple enough to where a child can understand it. But the theology, the deep lore, as we would say, is just vast.
Kind of like how Star Wars used to be.
Yeah, when it used to be good.
Right? Like on the surface, it's just a space movie. But for the fans, we delved deeper and got into, the Jedi lore, the Jedi, myth, the beginning of the Sith. And, if you dive, you'll find more, right?
Well, if you have any religious discussion long enough, it always comes back to Star Wars.
It does.
Always comes back to Star Wars.
But I prefer the explanation of the Force before the midichlorians were introduced, right? Like it was almost like an encapsulation of all religions into one, right? And this is what the Jedi were, men and women of the Force, right? Like, and that was a great way. I don't know. It was a great way to introduce that whole world.
Didn't Lucas tell a story where someone told him, like, you've created this religion here. You should make this a religion. That's where the money is. And Lucas was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I just want to make films.
I was kind of
sell action figures.
I was kind of looking forward to George Lucas's next film when he was gonna have, Bob and Nancy midichlorian, and they were gonna be dancing together and creating all the other midichlorians, and then the progeny of the midichlorian.
Oh gosh, Odin.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to ask because we had talked about this a little bit earlier before you had hopped on, but I'd love to get your take on this just real quick. So we were asking the question: what do you think it is that makes all these horror tropes of the Catholic Church, or making like the Catholic Church more of a cult-like satanic ritual, and all of these like deep underlying corruption within the church, whether it be Protestant or Catholic or whatever? Why do you think these tropes are so utilized in Hollywood? Because I even have friends that are secular. I have friends that are atheists, and they say any horror film that delves with demon possession and cults, I'm out. I don't do it. I can do monster movies. I can do ghost movies. But when it comes to like religion, demons and cults, I can't do it. It hits me too hard. And these are people who want nothing to do with faith or religion or God. So do you have any? We may have talked about this when we talked, I think last year. But what do you think it is about that horror trope that like people just are like, I can't do this? Like, is there just reality in it, or I don't know.
I think absolutely. Yeah. I think it hits people, whether they want to admit that or not. I think it's because it does seem a bit more real. And also you think about how often do we see evil in the world, right? We know that there are people that have done such horrible things. And oftentimes we, of course, our minds, our reason want to go straight to, oh, they're insane, they're crazy. But then we also know there's things that have happened which we can't explain either. And so I think that especially when you deal with like demonic possession or films that deal and delve into those topics, I think that it is going into that part of the brain that we have, because obviously as a Christian, I would say it's because God has created us in his image and likeness. And so therefore there's already that image there. And so whether we want to admit that or not, it is there. And so I think that it probably, if you're someone where you don't personally believe, but you find yourself almost being kind of like pushed away or feeling uncomfortable, that might just be that inner sign to yourself of, oh, because there is something real that is trying to kind of push that away because I'm not comfortable with it. So I think there's that level of realism with it. And that's why I'm always interested to find, especially actual exorcists and what their conversations are. Like there's a really great exorcist, Father Chad Ripperger, and he's always very just straightforward with everything. He's an active exorcist still in the church. And he talks about his process. And one of the things that he did was he is someone who's trained in psychology. And so he tells everyone, that 99% of the time, the people that come to see him aren't possessed. They're dealing with some psychological issue. And then that 1% of the time, it are people who are usually only, having some type of diabolic influence, not necessarily full on possession. But the other interesting thing is that he said it's gotten more and more difficult to drive out demons as time has gone on, because a part of it is not just the actual prayers, but then also the faith. So as people's faith begins to decline, right, our access essentially to those graces, that the infinite graces that Christ won for us on the cross, become that much harder to obtain, including for exorcists, because they're acting on behalf of the church, on behalf of the body of Christ. And so it's always fascinating to look into that. One of the things that he does, though, that I find most fascinating is that he will sometimes, if he has some thoughts about whether this person is possessed, he will sprinkle a chair with holy water. And so he's had it before where people have come in and they'll sit down and he'll say, okay, I have a pretty good idea this person's probably not possessed. But then there's sometimes when he would have someone come in and they would do everything to stay away from the chair. And they wouldn't tell him why. It's like, oh, why don't I have a seat? I don't want to have a seat. I don't want to sit down. And like, they just don't really understand what's going on with them.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, let's go through. We've got some really good chat questions here, so I want to get this and wrap up our conversation. I want to apologize for some of the people who were unable to make it today. Danica, Comic Book Girl 19, she lost power in her building, although she's listening on her phone, which is on low power mode. Melanie Mack was supposed to be here. She wasn't able to see the film. I know we'll get her at some point. So, and then CinemaCon. John Wen couldn't make it, but let's go through these final super chats and comments as we wrap it up. Red French Moon says Versus and Film Threat are great for €2. Well, thank you. I wanted to start a different kind of group, discussion show, because I love the format. I love Tuesday night's main event. I love, FNT. I love the Popcast guys. Just like I love that format of like group of people, we talk a topic, and so we're going to keep doing it, and we want to make it interesting and different every time. So thank you, Red French Moon. That was very long-winded what I just said. I'm trying to wrap up. What am I doing? That's like Gary responding to super chats. The show's only going to go 9 more hours. Greedy Delver for 2. Signs is about demons, not aliens. Well, certainly demons from someone dealing with demons. Yes. I mean, literally about aliens, but also what I'm saying is both answers are correct.
Absolutely.
And then thank you for that. And then Yumazer says, wait, what if one of the guests is currently possessed?
So I'm wearing glasses.
Definitely
You can't see my eyes, mother. I caught myself.
Nothing's coming to my place tomorrow. We're driving to Vegas together, so that should be interesting.
Yeah.
If you were possessed, you would have just let that fly, Dante.
That's
Yeah.
true. That is
There you
true.
go. Pilgrim Media for 2 says, watch Art Bell Father Malachi Martin interview.
Oh, Father Malachi Martin.
Malachi. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Put that on the recommend.
Love smart
CD969 says, Odin, you need to read the book of the actual account in 1949 called The Devil Came to St. Louis.
I don't know. Yeah, even that exorcist I mentioned earlier, he's written several books on the subject, not like in a fantastical way of, oh, I'm going to tell you these amazing stories but like practical steps to how to like handle situations that you might be in. And even his stuff, I'm not diving into it very quickly because it's like I really don't want to.
El Caliente. Oh, that's terrible. But my apologies.
El Caliente.
Caliente. Why does our corrupt and illegitimate so-called leaders mock the church and Catholics? That may be an interesting topic, bracketing the Protestants and the atheist bro. I've noticed this for years. People in Hollywood and it's gotten much worse, in particular on social media and in entertainment. It is fair game to go after Catholics and Christians and to openly mock or have just sort of disdain. I am sort of like, and it's just starting to bother me because I have friends who happen to be, Christians, Catholics, whatever, and it's bothersome. My friend group is all over the map, right? I have friends who like Star Trek, and I have friends who like Star Wars. It's all over the place.
Chris, can I just throw something in here really
please,
quick?
Please,
to this
because it
question?
just bothers me. This has crept in, and it's very true.
I have a lot of friends in Hollywood, and I hear a lot of stories. And the problem with Hollywood, if you look at it right now, I think we all know that Hollywood is very corrupt and very dark right now, and there's a lot of really horrible things going on within the sphere of celebrity. I would say that the reason that our so-called leaders and Hollywood, the reason that they mock the church, the reason that they mock Catholics, the reason that they mock faith is because they love darkness rather than light. And so when they see that there is something that's going to convict them and stand against them and what they want and the desires of their flesh and the corruption, they have to resist it. So I think that's the simplest answer.
And also, when it comes to the light will always expose the darkness, and that's why when you look at the church, especially, even when you look at the Catholic Church under Pope Francis, because there's a lot of criticism that can be given in that direction for sure, the teachings have not changed. Like even today, a document just came out reaffirming that attacks against human dignity include gender theory, right? That's an attack against human dignity to claim that you can be one thing or the other. Surrogacy has also been condemned as an attack against human dignity as well. So these things that most people don't, right, even other Christian denominations don't necessarily agree with per se, like this is something that's still being held on to. It could be contraception, abortion, all these issues. I think that's another part of it too, is that, and that's one of the things that Nefarious brings up in that film, is a conversation about why do people hate God so much? Why do people hate Christianity so much? A lot of it's because it's almost like they're looking at a mirror. They don't want to admit that they're doing something that is wrong. And because no one wants to admit they're wrong, right? And I think that's another part of it, is like they're putting a giant mirror. That light is exposing it, and they don't want that. They want to keep it covered up.
And you'll find that a lot of people that eventually turn to faith have either been non-believers or have been believers to a point, but actually actively angry with God. And there just comes for many people, there just comes a breaking point where God reaches them finally. So there's all kinds of people that'll tell you all kinds of stories, and everybody's a rival. Everybody that who has a faith, their story is probably very different, and they probably arrived at it in a very different way.
And a final comment here, and then we're gonna be on our way. Fedorovsky says, try to make a horror film about the horrors of the new woke religion and T ideology. Not sure that would go down well. Yeah, we're
living that film.
It's interesting to see what
we're living it right now.
What's okay. I mean, even when it comes to jokes, right? Dave Chappelle, there are certain comedians they go after for certain types of jokes. You can joke about this, You can't joke about that. I think everything is fair game, but when you see one constantly targeted over and over, it does become concerning. So we will revisit this topic. I think this is really interesting because I guarantee the nunsploitation genre is not going away, especially Sydney Sweeney. We didn't really get to talk about Immaculate. We did talk about it on Film Threat, but I'd love to discuss it with the group and force you all to watch a Sydney Sweeney movie, but perhaps another time. Everybody, if we could just let's everybody plug your channels as we go around the horn here.
Yeah, Dante from Verbal Riot. You could catch me on YouTube. Follow me on X. And tomorrow, me and Chris will be in Vegas for the meetup and for some of the CinemaCon stuff, I think. We'll see. Either way, it's going to be a good time. And yeah, follow me there.
Cool.
Thank you guys again for having me on. This was a blast. I really appreciate. This has been a blessing and an honor to be with you guys today. You guys can find me MVP Maxfield Von Priestley. I will be in Vegas this week with these guys. I'm hoping to be there for the Film Threat evening, the Nerdrotic meetup and everything, so it'll be a blast. I hope to see you all there. Blessings to everyone, and thank you guys again for having me on.
Hey, thank you guys so much, everybody in the chat, even the people that disagreed with me. Thank you so much for coming and giving your opinion. You can find me on X at Aaron_Sparrow. On YouTube, you can find me on Thinking Critical. It's a comic book channel where we do do various commentaries on pop culture. You can find me on Max's channel, and you can find me on Popped by Culture on Tuesday nights.
Sorry I was late, everybody, but glad I could come on even just for the tail end. You can find me over at OMB Reviews on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, Twitter. I have a show tomorrow night where I talk box office, starting around 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. And just again, shout out to Chris for inviting me on to have this conversation.
Thank you, Odin. That was awesome. And I'll see you in Vegas tomorrow night for the Film Threat party. In addition, Hollywood on the Rocks is going to be at an earlier time this week because Alan and I are going to CinemaCon. I'm going to Crash CinemaCon on Wednesday. So normally Hollywood on the Rocks is at 1 p.m. We'll be starting earlier sometime between 9 and 10 a.m. So check that live stream. And thank you for watching. I appreciate it. If you have other guests you'd like to suggest, put them in the comments and or topics. Versus is going to continue as a discussion show. I hope you continue to tune in. Did I forget anything, anybody? Usually Alan is here and he keeps me... He knows what to say when I forget. Oh, thank you to our mods, Lord Thaw. Ms. Peacock is not here. Solomon Thornton, just everybody in the chat that helps the mod. Lord Thaw, thank you so much, and thank you, chat, for your helpful comments. All right, later.